The wind in the glassed zone was a liar. It never howled. Not anymore. For 300 years since the schism, since the orbital platforms had turned on each other and melted half a continent into a mirror, the wind had learned a new language. It whispered. It slithered over dunes of shimmering black dust with a dry, sibilant hiss, a sound that flayed the nerves raw and promised a slow death by 1,000 tiny cuts. Kalen knew the sound better than his own heartbeat. It was the lullaby of his wretched existence, the rhythm to which he scavenged, fought, and fled. His sand crawler, the vagrant, groaned as it crested another obsidian wave, its treads churning through silica fine as powdered bone. Inside the cramped cockpit, the air was thick with the scent of recycled oxygen, hot metal, and stale synth-calf. On the console, a dozen jury-rig scanners flickered, most of them showing nothing but the endless, featureless expanse. But one, a salvaged gravimetric sensor he'd pulled from a crashed Consortium Enforcer skiff, was tracing a line so faint it was barely there. A whisper of a distortion pointing east, straight into the silence. The silence was new, maybe 3 weeks old. It had started as a rumor traded by desperate scrappers in the shadow of the Consortium's demarcation wall, a patch of the zone where the wind forgot its voice, where sand fell without a sound, where even the light seemed to get lost. Now, it was a documented phenomenon, a growing circle of absolute null on the Consortium's maps, an anomaly they couldn't explain, and therefore desperately wanted to contain. Their patrol drones, sleek silver predators, now haunted the perimeter of the silence, enforcing a quarantine with lethal prejudice. Kalen throttled the vagrant's engine, the low rumble beneath his feet, a comforting reality against the creeping dread of his destination. He should have been heading west, back toward the wall with the haul of old-world power conduits he'd found in the shell of a buried mag train. It was enough to clear his debt with Rorik, enough to buy a few weeks of breathing room and maybe even a taste of real, non-recycled water. But the lure of the silence was a siren song for a man like him. The Consortium feared it, which meant it was powerful. And in Kalen's world, power meant old-world tech, the kind of pre-schism relic that could either get you executed for heresy or set you up for life. He was banking on the latter. He was banking on the idea that at the heart of that unnatural quiet lay a prize worth dying for, something the sanctimonious technophobes of the Consortium had missed, a piece of the past they so desperately wanted to erase. The edge of the silence wasn't a line, it was a feeling. One moment, the vagrant's chassis was vibrating with the engine's thrum and the hiss of the wind. The next, it was gone. The silence that fell was not an absence of noise, but a presence. A heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed in from all sides. The engine was still running. He could feel the deck plates vibrating under his boots, but the sound was simply not there. He checked the external mics. Dead. He swallowed. And the sound of it, the small, wet click in his own throat, was obscenely loud in the dead air of the cockpit. He pushed onward, flying blind by sound, relying solely on his instruments. The zone outside, once a familiar landscape of lethal beauty, had become an alien world. The black sand fell from the crest of dunes imperfectly silent, dreamlike waterfalls. The sun beat down with a new kind of intensity, unfiltered by the haze of dust that usually hung in the air. For 2 days, he drove into the void, the solitude gnawing at him. It was a different kind of loneliness from the usual emptiness of the zone. This was a profound cosmic isolation, The feeling of being the last moving thing in a dead universe. On the third day, the drone appeared. It was a consortium Sparrow, a hunter-killer model, and it came over a dune with the silent, horrifying grace of a hawk dropping on a mouse. No warning, no engine noise, just a sudden, malevolent shape against the white-hot sky. Kalen's blood went cold. He slammed his fist on a panel, and the vagrant's hull plating polarized, its matte gray surface shifting to a shimmering, mirrored silver that reflected the black dunes around it. The camouflage was a desperate trick, old-world tech that was highly illegal, but it was all he had. The Sparrow hovered, its optical sensor, a single red eye, sweeping the landscape. It knew something was here. His gravimetric sensor had been a passive lure, but his engine was a beacon. He cut the power, plunging the crawler into total stillness, holding his breath as the drone drifted closer. He could see the missile pods under its wings, the articulated pulse cannon on its chin. The red eye passed over him. Once, twice. He could feel its query signals washing over the hull, tasting his presence. Then, with an agonizing slowness, it turned and moved on, a silent ghost disappearing over the next dune. Kalen didn't breathe until it was gone. He waited another hour in the sweltering, dead cockpit before daring to power up again. The encounter had sharpened his desperation. The consortium was here, and they were hunting. Whatever was at the center of this void, he was running out of time to find it. He found it 6 hours later, the terrain flattened out, the dunes receding to reveal a vast, circular plain. The sand here wasn't sand anymore. It was a sheet of black glass, perfectly smooth and polished, stretching for kilometers in every direction, reflecting the bleached sky in a flawless, dizzying mirror. It was the epicenter, the source of the silence. His crawler's sensors went insane, needles twitching erratically, screens filling with gibberish. Nothing in his databanks, nothing in the fragmented histories of the schism, spoke of a weapon that could do this. It wasn't destruction, it was transformation, a scar so precise and absolute it felt like the work of a god, not a bomb. He left the vagrant and stepped out onto the glass, his magnetic boots clamping on with a dull thud that was felt more than heard. The heat rising from the surface was immediate, baking through the soles of his boots. He walked for what felt like an eternity, a lone figure in a disorienting world of black glass and white sky, guided only by the screaming spike on his handheld grav scanner. At the very center of the plane, he found it a flaw, a faint hairline seam in the glass, forming a perfect circle about 3 meters in diameter. It wasn't a crack, it was too perfect, like a door that had been painted over. This was it. The source of the gravimetric anomaly was directly beneath his feet. He knelt, pulling the sonic drill from his back. It was another piece of forbidden tech, a heavy, vibrating tool that could phase through solid matter by matching its resonant frequency. He calibrated the frequency, the numbers on the small screen jumping wildly as the drill tried to lock onto the strange material of the glass plane. Finally, it settled, and a low hum vibrated up his arms, the first sound he had truly heard in days. He placed the tip against the seam and pulled the trigger. The drill bit into the glass, not with a grinding noise, but with a shimmering distortion, peeling away layers of reality like an onion. It was slow, agonizing work. The drill heated up, threatening to overload, and sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes. He felt like an ant trying to chew its way through a diamond. Hours passed. The sun began to dip, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple that were reflected in the endless mirror beneath him. He was running on fume, his muscles screaming, but he couldn't stop. He was so close. With a final push, the drill broke through. There was no snap, no crackle, just a sudden lack of resistance. A wave of energy, cold and blue, erupted from the opening. A silent shock wave that washed over him. It wasn't concussive. It was intrusive. It felt like it passed through his body, touching every cell, reading every synapse, tasting his memories. His vision swam. His gear shorted out with a shower of sparks, and the world dissolved into a silent, blue-white light. His last thought before darkness took him was that the prize wasn't a relic. It was a trap. He awoke to the gentle hum of a world that was not his own. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and ozone, a scent he hadn't experienced since he was a child, before the reclamation purifiers had sterilized the consortium's biosphere. He was lying not on hard glass, but on a surface that was soft and yielding, like moss. He sat up, his head throbbing. He was in a vast cavern, but the walls were not rock. They were a lattice of bone-white material and what looked like woven, pulsating fiber optics, all glowing with a soft, internal luminescence. The entire structure felt alive, the walls gently expanding and contracting as if the very chamber was breathing around him. It was not a bunker. It was not a weapon. It was a womb, drawn by an instinct he didn't understand. He got to his feet and followed a brighter vein of light in the floor, his boots making no sound on the soft ground. The corridor opened into a central chamber, a space so large the far walls were lost in the soft gloom. In the center of the chamber, the source of the light was revealed. Suspended in the air, held by invisible forces, was a heart. It was immense, the size of his sandcrawler, and it was undeniably biological. It was a lattice of glowing blue veins and dark, crystalline muscle, and it pulsed with a slow, powerful, silent rhythm. With every beat, waves of light and energy washed through the chamber, and Kalen felt them pass through him, a feeling of ancient, immeasurable power that made the hair on his arms stand up. It was the most beautiful and terrifying thing he had ever seen. He was not alone. Standing before the great heart, bathed in its ethereal glow, was the figure of a woman. She was translucent, a hologram of shimmering blue light, but her form was perfect, detailed down to the wisps of hair that framed her face and the concerned frown on her lips. She wore the simple, functional jumpsuit of a pre-schism scientist, a ghost from a world Kalen only knew from forbidden archives. She turned to face him, her holographic eyes seeming to look right through him into the desperate, greedy soul that had brought him to this place. Her expression was not one of anger, but of profound, ancient weariness, a sadness that seemed to echo across centuries. When she spoke, her voice was not a sound that traveled through the air, but a thought that bloomed directly inside his mind, clear and resonant as a bell. I have been waiting for centuries. What have you done? You've started the birth, and now the shepherds will hear the cry. The thought that formed in Kalen's mind was not his own, yet it felt more real than the grit under his fingernails. It was a voice woven from sorrow and static, a ghost's lament. Birth shepherds, what are you? He managed to think, the words clumsy and loud in the silent communion. He took a half step back, his scavenger's instincts screaming at him. This was not a derelict vault. It was a tomb. And he had just kicked down the door. The hologram, this echo of a dead woman, shimmered, her form wavering as if disturbed by his raw, untutored thoughts. I am Alara, warden of this facility, or what is left of me, a mimetic echo, imprinted on the chronoton fields to await a catalyst. Her mental gaze swept over his dust-caked clothes, his scarred hands, the desperate hunger in his eyes. I did not expect one such as you. I did not expect anyone at all. Her weariness was a palpable force, a weight that settled in Kalen's chest. He fought it, falling back on the only thing he knew, suspicion. Your old world, pre-schism. What is this place? Some kind of a bioweapon. It was the Consortium's favorite bedtime story. The reason all advanced organic technology was heresy. The schism they preached was a war against the hubris of scientists who sought to create life, to build machines that bled and breathed. The hologram's sadness deepened. Weapon you see a cradle and call it a weapon. Your masters have taught you their fear well. This is the artery, a planetary terraforming engine. The heart you see before you was designed to beat in rhythm with a barren world, to pump life blood into dead soil, to weave an atmosphere from dust and light. It was meant to be our future, our children's birthright across the stars. Kalen stared at the pulsing heart, its silent, rhythmic beat, a hypnotic symphony of creation, a terraforming engine. The tech was mythical, a legend from the golden age of expansion. A single component from such a device would be worth more than the entire Scrappers Guild. His greed, a familiar and comforting warmth, stirred in his belly, but it was quickly extinguished by a cold tide of dread. Then what happened? What was the schism? Ilara's form drifted closer, her translucent feet passing soundlessly over the living floor. It was a schism of philosophy. We, the architects of the artery, believed life was the answer to the void. We built living ships, thinking cities, worlds that could heal themselves. But there were others, those who saw only chaos in biology, who believed in the purity of the machine, of cold logic and absolute control. They saw our creations not as children, but as abominations. They called themselves the Shepherds. The name sent a chill down Kalen's spine. It was a word from the oldest texts, a name whispered in the same breath as the orbital platforms that had glassed the zone. They were the ones who won, Kalen stated, the realization dawning like a black sun. They created the consortium, built the walls, outlawed your science. They are the ones who enforce the silence. They did not just win, Alara corrected, her thought voice laced with an ancient, burning anger. They performed an exorcism. They turned our own orbital defense systems against us, not to destroy our works, but to sterilize them. The platforms didn't drop bombs. They fired purification beams, weapons designed to shatter organic molecular structures. The glassed zone is not a wasteland. It is a monument to their victory, a scar to remind humanity of the sin of creation. They buried this artery, the last of its kind, and hoped it would die. As if responding to her words, the heart's rhythm changed. The slow, steady pulse quickened. The blue light it emitted brightened, shifting toward a piercing white. A low, powerful hum began to vibrate through the floor, a true sound that Kalen could feel in the bones of his feet. It was the first sound the artery had made. It is waking. Alara whispered, her form flickering more rapidly. When you broke the seal, you introduced an unfiltered variable into a sealed system. Your own biological energy, your life force. It was the spark that reignited the process. The artery believes its gestation is complete. It is preparing to be born. The hum grew in intensity, and Kalen felt a pressure building in his skull. The walls of the chamber pulsed faster, the veins of light within them flaring with each beat of the heart. Born into what Kalen demanded, stumbling back. It will try to do what it was built for. It will try to heal the zone. Its first act will be a cry, a wave of life-giving energy, a pulse of pure, generative code sent out to rewrite the sterile landscape above. "That sounds good," Kalen said, his voice tight with uncertainty. Alara's projection turned to him, her eyes burning with urgency. "You do not understand. To the shepherds, that cry is the ultimate heresy. They have monitored this place for 300 years, waiting for the faintest sign of life. To them, a planetary engine restarting itself is not a miracle. It is a plague. A cancer that must be excised before it can spread. That pulse will be the loudest scream in their silent world. They will come not just with enforcers, but with cleansers. They will not repeat their mistake. This time, they will not bury the artery. They will unmake it." The hum became a deafening, silent roar inside his head. The light from the heart was now so bright he had to shield his eyes. Cracks of pure, white energy began to arc from the heart to the chamber walls, weaving a cage of blinding light. "I cannot stop it." Alara's voice was strained, breaking apart. "I am only a memory. But you are alive. You are real. You can carry the message." "Message? What message?" Kalen yelled, though no sound came from his lips. "The artery is not just an engine. It is an archive. It contains the genetic codes, the blueprints for everything the shepherds sought to erase. The seed of our philosophy is encoded within its core. If the artery is destroyed, that knowledge is lost forever. You must take the seed. You must get it past the wall, to the freeholds in the west. Find the others who remember. Show them what was lost." From the base of the colossal heart, a single, glowing tendril detached itself and snaked toward him. At its tip was a pod, a crystalline vessel the size of his fist, glowing with the same brilliant white light. Inside, a complex, double helix structure of liquid light pulsed in time with the heart. The seed. His mind reeled. This was insane. He was a scrapper, not a savior. His only goal had been to find something to sell, something to clear his debts and keep him alive another cycle. Now this ghost from the past was asking him to be a messiah, to run a gauntlet of shepherd cleansers for a cause that had died centuries before he was born. He looked from the seed to the exit, his survival instinct warring with the awe and terror that filled the chamber. He could leave. He could run back to the vagrant and try to outrun the coming storm, but the shepherds would be hunting for the source of the pulse. They would find the opening he had made. They would find his tracks. Whether he took the seed or not, he was already implicated. He was already a dead man, with a curse that was part prayer, part damnation. He lunged forward and snatched the crystalline pod from the air. It was warm to the touch, and it pulsed with a life of its own, a faint, rhythmic vibration that seemed to match his own heartbeat. The moment his fingers closed around it, the arcs of energy in the chamber converged on his position. Alara's voice screamed in his mind, "Go! It is done! The cry is coming!" He didn't need to be told twice. He turned and ran, the pod clutched in his hand, a beacon of impossible hope. The corridor he had come down was now writhing, the walls groaning and shifting as the artery's birth pangs intensified. He scrambled upward, back toward the opening he had drilled. As he reached it, a final, coherent thought from Ilara found him, a whisper of a promise across the ages. Life finds a way. Kaylin. It always does. Then her presence was gone, replaced by an overwhelming wave of pure energy that surged up from the depths behind him. It threw him through the opening, out onto the glass plane. He landed hard, the seed skidding across the mirrored surface. Scrambling to his feet, he saw the entire plane begin to fracture. Hairline cracks of white light spiderwebbed out from the hole he had made, spreading across the black glass like veins. The oppressive silence was shattered by a low, resonant tone that seemed to emanate from the ground itself, a planetary hum that vibrated through his entire body. The artery was singing. He grabbed the seed, shoved it into a shielded pocket in his jumpsuit, and ran. He ran faster than he had ever run in his life, his magnetic boots clanging against the fracturing glass. Behind him, the hum rose in pitch, and a column of brilliant, white light erupted from the center of the plane, shooting miles into the sky. It was a beacon, a declaration, a birth cry shouted into the heavens. He threw himself into the Vagrant's cockpit, his hands flying across the ignition sequence. The engine roared to life, a familiar, comforting sound in a world that had suddenly gone mad, as he slammed the crawler into gear and sped away. The rear-view monitor showed the pillar of light pulsing, sending out concentric rings of energy that washed over the glassed zone. Where the light passed, the black sand shimmered and changed, the dead silica stirring with a faint, green luminescence. The artery was already at work, but on another screen, his long-range comm scanner. A dozen new contacts appeared on the eastern horizon. They were moving fast, in perfect formation, their energy signatures cold, precise, and utterly without mercy. The shepherds were coming. He was no longer a scavenger hunting for a prize. He was a courier, carrying the last hope of a dead world. And the hunt had just been reversed. The vagrant bucked like a dying animal, throwing Kaylin against his restraints as it hurtled over a fractured dune of nascent, glowing flora. The glassed zone was no longer a mirror. It was a kaleidoscope of chaotic transformation. In the wake of the artery's pulse, the sterile black sand was writhing, giving birth to alien botany. Crystalline trees, their branches like frozen lightning, erupted from the ground, shattering the glassy plain. Bioluminescent mosses, spread and pulsing, geometric patterns, casting the landscape in an eerie green and blue glow. It was a world being reborn, but it was a violent, convulsive birth. And Kaylin was driving straight through the aftershocks. On the tactical display, the Shepherd contacts resolved into individual signatures, 6 Sparrow-class hunter-killers, the same model that had nearly found him before, flanked a much larger vessel. Its profile was angular and severe, a flying fortress of cold, black metal that absorbed the new light of the zone, giving nothing back. Its IFF tag read Vigilance. It was a Shepherd Purifier-class cruiser, a ship designed not for patrol, but for eradication. They weren't coming to quarantine the anomaly. They were coming to cauterize it. A proximity alert screamed, and Kalen hauled the crawler's control yoke hard to the left. The ground where he'd been a second before erupted in a silent, blossoming flower of plasma fire. The sparrows were toying with him, bracketing him, herding him. They could have vaporized him instantly, but they weren't. They were driving him west, away from the pillar of light, away from the artery. He understood their logic with a sickening clarity. He was a contamination, a bug that had scurried out of the nest. They wanted to isolate and study him before sterilizing the source. Inside his jumpsuit, the seed pulsed with a steady, reassuring warmth against his ribs. It was a stark contrast to the cold sweat beating on his forehead. Ilara's final thought echoed in his memory. Life finds a way. It was a beautiful sentiment, but it felt hopelessly naive in the face of the shepherd's cold, machine-like precision. He needed a miracle, an advantage, something this dying world could offer him that they couldn't predict. His eyes scanned the churning landscape, and an idea, desperate and probably suicidal, began to form. The artery wasn't just birthing plants. It was reshaping the very ground beneath him. Old, buried structures were being pushed to the surface by the explosive growth of the new ecosystem. Miles ahead, half buried in a thicket of glowing crystalline trees, was the skeletal frame of an old-world maglev train line, its pylons thrusting into the sky like the ribs of a long-dead leviathan. The consortium had meticulously wiped all records of the pre-schism transport networks, deeming them inefficient and chaotic. But scrappers knew the legends. The maglev lines weren't just tracks. They were powered conduits, some of which, it was rumored, still drew residual energy from deep geothermal taps. It was a long shot, a ghost story to tell around a flickering glow lamp, but it was the only one he had. He pushed the vagrant's engine to its limit, the crawler groaning in protest as he aimed for the skeletal tracks. A sparrow swooped low, its pulse cannon spitting a stream of silent, incandescent bolts that stitched a line across the ground behind him. He was out of time. Reaching the base of a massive pylon, he slammed on the brakes, the vagrant skidding to a halt. He popped the cockpit canopy and jumped out, the strange, ozone-rich air of the new zone filling his lungs. The seed in his pocket pulsed faster, its warmth spreading through his chest. He slapped a panel on the side of the crawler, and a heavy-duty power coupling cable snaked out. He sprinted to the pylon, the cable trailing behind him. The base of the pylon was a mess of rusted metal and exposed conduits, but he found what he was looking for: a primary power junction, its cover miraculously intact. He ripped it open with his crowbar, revealing a series of massive, corroded bus bars. The sparrows were circling now, their red eyes fixed on him, their weapons silent. They were curious. What was the little organic bug doing? He took a deep breath, pulled the seed from his pocket, and jammed it into the junction box, wedging it between two of the largest bus bars. The crystal pod flared with an intense white light, and the seed's internal helix structure began to spin with dizzying speed. Then he jammed the live end of the vagrant's power coupling against the pod. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The vagrant's generator, designed to power a single, aging vehicle, was now connected to a terraforming engine's embryonic heart, which was in turn connected to the dormant nervous system of a continent-spanning power grid. Energy, raw and untamed, surged in both directions. The crawler's lights blew out. Its engine sputtered and died with a final, choked gasp. The seed, however, did the opposite. It drank the crawler's energy and then magnified it, pouring it into the ancient grid. The pylon above him began to hum, a deep, resonant tone that vibrated through the very air, all along the horizon. As far as he could see, the skeletal remains of the maglev line began to glow. First a faint blue, then a brilliant searing white. The shepherds had made a fatal error in calculation. They had assumed the artery's pulse was a localized, biological phenomenon. They had no idea it could interface with their own ancestors' technology. The ground around the pylons began to liquefy, not from heat, but from some kind of resonant frequency that tore the new flora apart. The sparrows, caught in the expanding energy field, began to falter. Their flight became erratic, their systems shorting out. One of them spiraled out of the sky and crashed into a crystalline tree, shattering into 1,000,000 pieces. The others tried to pull back, but it was too late. An arc of pure white energy, a dragon of captured lightning, leaped from the pylon Kalen was hiding behind and struck the nearest sparrow, vaporizing it in an instant. The sky was suddenly filled with a web of energy, arcing from pylon to pylon, creating a deadly cage. Kalen watched in stunned silence. He hadn't just flipped a switch. He had unleashed a ghost, awakening a power that had slept for 300 years. The remaining sparrows were swatted from the sky like flies. From the cockpit of the Purifier cruiser, a new voice, cold and laced with digital static, broadcast on an open, unencrypted channel. It was the first time Kalen had ever heard a shepherd speak. Subject designated Anomaly Prime. You have co-opted a Tier 0 infrastructure. This is a violation of the purity protocols. Cease your actions and surrender for sterilization. Kalen laughed, a raw, ragged sound that felt alien in his own throat. Sterilization. You can come and try, he yelled at the sky, knowing they could hear him. He was high on adrenaline and the sheer, intoxicating feeling of having, for the first time in his life, a weapon big enough to matter. But his triumph was short-lived. The voice from the Vigilance was chillingly calm. Protocol violation confirmed. Escalating response. Deploying nullifiers. 3 objects detached from the belly of the Purifier. They weren't ships. They were pods, smooth and black, that fell toward the ground with unnerving speed. They landed with seismic thuds at equidistant points around the now arcing maglev line, forming a perfect triangle with Kalen at its center. The pods unfolded, revealing not weapons, but complex antenna arrays that began to hum with a discordant anti-frequency. The brilliant white light of the pylons began to flicker. The deep, resonant hum of the grid faltered, replaced by a grating, dissonant whine. The nullifiers were attacking the energy itself, broadcasting a counter-resonance designed to cancel out the power grid, to force the awakened ghost back into its grave. He had to get the seed back. The grid would die without it. He scrambled back to the junction box, the air thick with the smell of ozone and a strange, metallic taste that felt like the energy field was being torn apart. As he reached the pylon, a shimmering wall of force, a distortion in the air, materialized in front of him. A nullifier field. He was trapped. The arcs of lightning between the pylons were weakening, turning from white to a sickly yellow. The cruiser, the Vigilance, began to descend slowly, its massive form blotting out the sky, a predator confident that its prey was finally caged. Kalen was on his knees, his borrowed power failing, his tiny rebellion about to be extinguished. He had poked the hornet's nest, and now the full, dispassionate wrath of the shepherds was descending upon him. He looked at the seed, still pulsing feebly in the junction box, and then at the shimmering wall of the nullifier field. Life finds a way. It was a nice thought, but sometimes life runs into a wall, and this wall was designed by gods who hated anything that grew. The shepherds weren't just here to kill him. They were here to prove, once and for all, that his kind of life, the messy, chaotic, unpredictable kind, had no place in their perfect, sterile universe. And as the shadow of the vigilance fell over him, he started to believe they were right. A new voice spoke in his mind, sharp and clear, cutting through the dissonant whine of the nullifiers. It was not Ilara's sorrowful echo. This voice was young, fierce, and vibrated with an impatient energy that felt like a coiled spring. Get up, scavenger. The architect's heart is not a toy. If you mean to use it, then use it properly. Kalen's head snapped up. There was a figure standing on the other side of the shimmering nullifier field, partially obscured by the distortion. It was a woman, clad not in scrapper rags or a consortium uniform, but in a form-fitting dark gray jumpsuit interwoven with what looked like the same glowing, fibrous material as the artery's walls. She was young, with short, cropped white hair that seemed to drink the ambient light, and her eyes, even through the energy barrier, burned with a fierce, analytical intensity. She held a long, slender rifle that looked less like a weapon and more like a complex scientific instrument. "Who are you?" Kalen projected, his own thoughts clumsy and slow compared to hers. "I am Lyra, of the Freeholds. And you have something that belongs to us." She gestured with her head towards the pylon. "That seed. It is a key, not a battery. You have woken the ghost in the machine, but you do not know the language it speaks." Before Kalen could process this, Lyra raised her rifle. It didn't fire a projectile. Instead, the tip of the barrel glowed, and a focused beam of the same dissonant, anti-frequency as the nullifiers lanced out. But this beam was different. It was precise, modulated. It struck the nullifier field not with force, but with a complex wave pattern. The shimmering wall of energy wavered, and for a fraction of a second, a hole, a perfect circle of clear air, opened in the barrier. Now, her voice snapped, this time audibly, a sharp command that cut through the air. Kalen didn't hesitate. He scrambled through the opening just as it collapsed behind him. He was on her side of the fence, the feebly pulsing pylon, and the dying seed now trapped behind the energy wall. "What did you do?" he gasped, breathing heavily. "Harmonic cancellation," she said, her eyes never leaving the descending purifier ship. "The shepherds are masters of control, but they are predictable. Their systems are designed for brute force suppression. They have forgotten the art of subtlety." She glanced at him, a flicker of something annoyance, perhaps, or professional curiosity in her gaze. "You have caused a great deal of trouble, scavenger. We have been monitoring the artery's dormancy for decades. We had a plan for its awakening, a quiet plan. You have turned it into a screaming beacon for every shepherd patrol in this quadrant." The ground shuddered as the vigilance lowered its massive landing struts, crushing the crystalline flora with indifferent finality. Hatches slid open along its belly, and ramps extended to the ground. From the darkness within, figures began to emerge. They were not human. They were exos, Humanoid machines plated in white ceramic armor. Their movements fluid and unnervingly silent. Each carried a pulse rifle, its design brutally efficient. They were the Shepherd's foot soldiers, their sterile instruments of compliance. We need to retrieve the seed and collapse the artery's energy signature before they can establish a permanent sterilization field, Lyra stated, her voice a low, urgent murmur. But it's behind the barrier, Kalen said, stating the obvious. And they control the barrier. For now, Lyra countered. She pointed her strange rifle not at the approaching exos, but at the ground. She fired, and a controlled pulse of energy struck one of the bioluminescent moss patches that was spreading across the ground. The moss flared, its internal light brightening and shifting from green to a vibrant, almost violent, magenta. A thick, root-like tendril erupted from the patch and shot towards the nearest nullifier pod, moving with the speed of a striking snake. It slammed into the pod's base, and the effect was immediate. The nullifier sputtered, the dissonant whine it emitted wavering in pitch. The shimmering energy wall it was projecting flickered. The artery's creations are not just decorative, Lyra explained, a hint of pride in her voice. They are symbiotic. They respond to specific energy frequencies. The architects designed them to be part of a network, a planetary immune system. The shepherds see a garden. I see an arsenal. She fired again, striking another patch of moss, and a second tendril lashed out, striking another nullifier. The energy barrier weakened further, its surface now rippling like disturbed water. The approaching exos registered the new threat. Several of them raised their rifles and fired at the attacking tendrils. The plasma bolts struck the organic cables, severing them. But for everyone they cut, two more grew in its place, spurred on by the raw, generative power of the artery. It was a battle of philosophies played out in real time, the shepherd's cold. Precise eradication versus the artery's chaotic, irrepressible growth. The barrier is destabilizing, Lyra said. But it won't last. I need a diversion. A big one. Something to draw the attention of the exos and the ship's primary tactical systems. Kalen looked at her, then back at his dead sandcrawler. The vagrant. It was a piece of junk, a rolling scrap heap held together with little more than rust and stubbornness. But its fusion core, while ancient and inefficient, was still intact. And it was highly unstable. I have an idea, he said, a grim smile touching his lips for the first time. It's loud, messy, and probably stupid. Lyra met his gaze, and for a moment he saw a glimmer of shared recklessness in her eyes. Loud and messy is a language the shepherds understand. What do you need? Can your rifle overload a fusion core? He asked. She nodded once. Easily. Then get ready, he said. He took off, sprinting in a wide arc around the battle, using the thick, crystalline trees for cover. The exos were focused on the attacking flora, their machine logic struggling to categorize a threat that grew back stronger every time they attacked it. Kalen circled around until he had a clear line of sight to the vagrant. He gave Lyra a sharp three-fingered scrapper's salute, the signal for go. Lyra raised her rifle. A thin, intensely bright beam shot across the battlefield, striking the vagrant's engine block. There was no immediate explosion. Instead, a high-pitched whine began to emanate from the crawler, a sound that drilled into the skull. The hull of the vehicle began to glow cherry red. The exos stopped firing, their white, featureless heads all turning in unison towards the new, overwhelming energy signature. The voice from the Vigilance broadcast again, a new note of urgency in its synthesized tones. Warning: unstable fissionable core detected. All units, fall back to containment perimeter. It was too late. With a blinding flash of white light, the vagrant's core went critical. The explosion was not a conventional blast of fire and shrapnel. It was a raw, dirty detonation that threw off a massive electromagnetic pulse. Every exo on the field froze, their internal systems fried. The lights on the Vigilance flickered and died. Even the nullifier pods sputtered, and the energy barrier collapsed completely. The diversion had worked. Kalen was already moving, his ears ringing, his vision spotted with after-images from the blast. He sprinted back to the pylon, Lyra right behind him. He ripped the seed from the junction box, its light now steady and strong again. "The ship will reboot in minutes," Lyra said, her voice urgent. "We have to go, now. Go where Kalen demanded. Back to the artery. It's our only chance. The shepherds will expect us to flee across the surface. They won't expect us to run back into the heart of the anomaly." She gestured towards a newly formed chasm in the ground, a fissure created by the artery's pulse, from which a faint, blue light emanated. "There. One of the primary conduits. It will take us deep, back to the central chamber." Kalen looked from the fissure to the massive, dark shape of the rebooting purifier ship. Running back into the belly of the beast felt like suicide. But looking at Lyra's determined face, at the calm, confident way she held her rifle, he realized it was the kind of suicide that made perfect sense. It was the unpredictable move, the chaotic, biological move, the kind of move a machine would never anticipate. He clutched the seed tightly. His life as a scavenger, a creature of surfaces and simple survival, was over. He was descending, not just into the earth, but into a conflict so ancient and so vast he couldn't comprehend its scale. He was a thief who had stolen a god's heart, and now he was running with the only people left who still remembered what it was for. As the first emergency lights flickered back to life on the hull of the Vigilance, Kalen and Lyra disappeared into the glowing fissure, plunging back into the world beneath the world, leaving the shepherds to stare at a battlefield of their own making, a garden of impossible life that had, for a brief, glorious moment, bitten back. The conduit was a throat, and they were being swallowed. The descent was a dizzying, weightless slide down a channel of smooth, bone-white material, illuminated by the pulsing veins of light that snaked along its walls. The air rushed past Kalen, thick with the scent of ozone and rich, damp earth. He held the seed against his chest, its steady, rhythmic pulse a grounding force in the disorienting fall. Lyra was a blur of motion beside him, her body angled with a practiced ease that suggested she had traveled these secret ways before. They emerged, not by landing, but by being gently deposited onto the mossy floor of a vast, cavern-like space. It was not the heart chamber. This was a different part of the artery, a nexus of countless glowing conduits that converged like the roots of an immense tree. In the center of the chamber was a pool of silvery, mercurial liquid that swirled with captured light. Lyra went to the pool's edge and knelt, dipping her hand into the liquid. Her expression was one of intense concentration. "The Vigilance is rebooting faster than I anticipated," her thought voice echoed in Kalen's mind, sharper now in the resonant quiet of the artery. "They are deploying drills, thermic lances, They intend to bore directly into this chamber. How do you know that? Kalen asked, looking at the pool. This is a sensory node, a scrying pool, if you want to be poetic, she explained without looking up. The artery is aware. It feels the drills like a knife in its flesh. It is in pain, and it is afraid. Kalen could feel it too, a low thrum of anxiety that vibrated through the floor, a subtle dissonance in the artery's hum. The shepherds were not just attacking, they were violating. He looked at the seed in his hand. Ilara said this was a key, an archive. What does it unlock? Lyra rose, pulling her hand from the pool. Droplets of silver light clung to her fingers before dissolving. It doesn't unlock a thing. It unlocks a person. It is a catalyst designed to interface with a specific genetic marker, a bloodline the shepherds thought they had wiped out 3 centuries ago. The bloodline of the architects. Her intense eyes fixed on him. It was never meant for a scavenger. It was meant for someone like me. Before Kalen could react, the chamber shuddered violently. Dust and glowing particles rained down from the ceiling. A high-pitched screeching sound. The protest of tortured metal and rock echoed from far above. The drills had breached the outer layers. Lyra's composure finally cracked, a flicker of desperation in her eyes. There is no time. They will be here in minutes. They will deploy a core dampener, and the artery will be neutralized before we can activate the final protocol. What final protocol? Kalen demanded. A failsafe, she said, her voice tight. The architects knew the shepherds might one day find this place. The artery was not just designed to create life, but to protect it. It can sever itself from this reality. Create a pocket dimension, a fold in space-time where it can continue its work, safe from their sterile crusade. But it requires an immense amount of energy. And it needs a guide, a living, symbiotic pilot to navigate the transition. She looked at him, and he finally understood the weight of her stare. It needs an architect. She extended her hand. Give me the seed. Kalen, this is not your fight. You have done more than enough. Let me finish it. Kalen looked down at the seed, its light pulsing in his palm. He thought of his life in the glassed zone, a life of taking, of surviving, of looking out for no one but himself. He had come here for a prize, for a score that would set him free. And he had found one, but it wasn't a piece of tech to be sold. It was a choice. He could give her the seed, and perhaps she would save this place. He could be a footnote in a story that wasn't his, or... He thought of Ilara's last message, the sadness and hope in her voice. I did not expect one such as you. He looked at Lyra, at the fierce determination in her eyes, the certainty of her birthright. The shepherds were predictable, she had said. Their logic was cold and absolute, and so, perhaps, was hers. They were 2 sides of the same ancient coin, a war of philosophies fought by ideologues. He was the variable, the chaotic element, the bug in the system. No, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Lyra's eyes widened in disbelief. What you would doom us all for your greed. It's not about greed, he said, clutching the seed tighter. It's about life. You said it yourself. The artery is alive. It's not a machine to be piloted or a weapon to be fired. You want to use it to run, to hide. But Ilara, she said, life finds a way. It doesn't find a way by hiding in another dimension. It finds a way by growing, by fighting, by adapting. The screeching from above grew louder. Closer. A section of the ceiling, directly over the scrying pool, began to glow a dull, angry red. "You are a fool," Lyra shouted, her telepathic voice cracking with fury. "You will get us all killed, maybe," Kalen said, his heart pounding. "But we'll die on our own terms." He closed his eyes and did the only thing that made sense to him. He didn't try to pilot the artery. He didn't try to unlock it. He offered himself to it. He held the seed against his own heart and focused all his will, all his fear, all his desperate elemosity and beautifully imperfect life into a single, silent thought. Not a command, but a plea. Live. The seed flared with a light so bright it was blinding. It didn't unlock him. It dissolved, its crystalline structure melting into his hand, flowing into his veins like liquid fire. Pain, exquisite and absolute, tore through him. He felt his own DNA being unwritten and rewritten. He felt the memories of the artery, the dreams of the architects, the terror of the schism, the long, lonely silence of its 300-year slumber flood his mind. He was no longer Kalen, the scavenger. He was a part of the whole. He opened his eyes. The world looked different, sharper, woven from threads of energy he could now see. Lyra was staring at him, her mouth agape, a look of utter astonishment on her face. Above them, the thermic lance finally broke through. A beam of incandescent energy, a pillar of the shepherd's sterile fire, lanced down towards the center of the chamber, but it never reached the pool. Kalen raised his hand, and, from the ground, 1,000 crystalline trees, born of his will and the artery's power, erupted upwards. They met the beam, not to block it, but to absorb it. The trees drank the fire, their branches glowing with the captured energy, transforming the shepherd's wrath into nourishment. The entire artery pulsed, not with fear, but with a surge of triumphant power. On the surface, the vigilance's sensors went haywire. The localized, biological anomaly they had come to sterilize had just become a planetary-scale event. The newly born flora of the glassed zone, energized by the repurposed power of the shepherd's own weapon, exploded in a wave of growth that rolled across the dunes. The purifier ship was lifted into the air on a bed of crystalline branches and living vines, its engines useless, its weapons silenced. It was not destroyed. It was simply held. A captured specimen in a world that would no longer bow to its cold logic. Down below, Kalen lowered his hand, his body thrumming with a power he was only just beginning to understand. He had not become a god. He had become a gardener. Lyra looked at him, her previous certainty shattered, replaced by a dawning awe. The genetic marker. It was never about bloodline. She whispered, it was about choice. The willingness to connect, not to control. Kalen smiled, a true, weary smile. He was still himself, but he was also something more. He was the zone. He was the artery. He was the chaotic, unpredictable, and undeniable proof that life, in all its messy glory, would not be sterilized. It would not be caged. It would simply grow. The shepherds had come to enforce the silence, but Kalen had given the world back its voice, and it was singing a song they could never hope to understand. The age of the shepherds was over. The age of the garden had begun.